Good afternoon, everyone. This is Carmen Rosa. I am from the NIDA Center for the Clinical Trials Network, and I want to welcome everybody for our next talk in our webinar, our data science webinar series. We have Dr. David Kotz from Dartmouth. He's going to be giving a talk on titled "The Security and Privacy Mobile Medical Applications." I have to do, okay. So hopefully everyone can hear us okay. Dr. Kotz is a professor at the Department of Computer Science at Dartmouth College. He's also an associate dean of the Faculty for the Science and the executive director of the Institute for Security Technology Studies. He's also a recipient of a big grant from the National Science Foundation, and he is going to give us a talk today based on the experience on that big project that they're doing based about security and privacy in health and wellness. So I want to remind everybody that this talk is being recorded, and we hope to have it later on available in our dissemination library. All lines are muted. At the end of the talk, we will open the lines for people to ask questions. And I will again welcome everybody, and I'd like Dr. Kotz to go ahead.
Thank you, Carmen. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation and the chance to talk about our project on trustworthy health and wellness, which is based at Dartmouth, but also involves Johns Hopkins, University of Illinois, the University of Michigan, and Vanderbilt University. We were motivated a few years ago by an interest in healthcare IT, generally speaking, the use of technology in healthcare, because of the importance of healthcare to the nation and to its economy, and the opportunity for information technology, broadly defined, to improve quality and reduce the cost of healthcare. And as computer scientists, most of us are computer scientists in this project, we were keenly aware of the advent of both mobile and cloud technology and its increasing use in health and wellness applications. And yet we're concerned about the potential security and privacy issues that come up when you use information technology in healthcare or wellness-related applications. And in fact, it's my feeling that both patients and clinicians, and for that matter, researchers, may not trust the technology unless they are assured that it will have strong security and privacy guarantees. And as it turns out, there's still quite a bit of research to do in order to enable that kind of trust in this technology. And so we prepared a proposal to the National Science Foundation about 3 years ago, and most of what I'm talking about today is sort of related to that proposal and the work that's underway. Our work was motivated by 5 trends in healthcare IT, and I'll just quickly go over those. The first one that I've noticed is a shifting locus of care, meaning that healthcare is happening at increasingly distributed locations. When I think of healthcare, I think of a hospital, and I go to the hospital and I get treated or diagnosed or something. But increasingly, that's not it's not that simple a picture. Healthcare is now being delivered through small clinics, many of which are satellites to bigger hospitals, elder care centers, or even in the home itself. And of course, the people involved, the patients and the clinical staff, move among these different locations, and so there's a lot of motion and distributed activity. And so mobile computing technology and cloud services to kind of glue it all together have a real potential to help here. The second trend is more economic, the shift towards or the advent of accountable care organizations, or ACOs. I'm sure many of you know about this. And these are a different way of structuring payment for health services, and in particular a focus on accountability for the health of the population rather than on a fee-for-service basis. And that means then that there's an incentive for the health providers to help their patients to engage with their health and to remain healthy, and that is an opportunity maybe for technology to help with that engagement or that metric collecting aspect. And the third trend is about continuous patient monitoring, again, in part to provide better service but also to lower costs, monitoring patients outside the clinical setting, either at home or throughout their daily lives, either for the purposes of monitoring them after some procedure or for some chronic disease management or just encouraging and enabling healthy behavior. There's a lot of continuous monitoring technology that could come into play. And fourth is a more of a technological trend. Of course, we've all seen the advent of mobile devices, at least in the form of smartphones, but also wearables increasingly, devices that can sense our physiology or activity or behavior, and also cloud services providing the back-end analytics for a lot of these applications provide us huge technical opportunities. And then finally, relating this to security and privacy, the threat environment is changing as well as the regulatory environment. The expanded use of healthcare IT has been promoted and pushed, of course, by the federal government and by many other factors, but it means that it's increasingly possible to enable larger scale privacy breaches than we may have had before. And it's well documented. We've seen many incidences of medical identity theft and other potential threats. And so the combination of these trends, economic, technical, security, is what inspired us to consider our project. Most of the work that we're conducting is related to mHealth or mobile health, and that is one of those buzz phrases that's been used so often now that it could mean almost anything. Well, here's what I mean when I say mHealth, and even this is still fairly broad. The use of mobile computing and communications technology in the delivery of healthcare or the collection of health information, either for research or epidemiological purposes or what have you. And that itself, as I said, comes in many forms. It might be mobile technology in the hands of clinical staff, using it in a clinical setting for the purposes of doing their job. And, for example, as a tablet being used by a physician. Or another form of mobile technology might be used still in the clinical setting for monitoring inpatients through the use of sensors that you might put on a patient to monitor them while they're in their patient room. Or you might send them home with technology and monitor them remotely, again, perhaps with wearable technology or at-home use technology like this blood pressure cuff, wireless Wi-Fi scales and the like. Or taking this now out of this sort of strictly clinical healthcare environment, let's think about wellness applications, and we're all aware of the tremendous growth in that industry, the use of mobile, wearable, at-home personal technology for measuring and monitoring and managing one's wellness and hopefully improving health. And then finally, maybe a different take on the use of mHealth, but also a very important and expanding one, is the use of mHealth in the developing world in economies where access to healthcare itself is a challenge. The use of mobile technology can now enable more people to get better access to healthcare. Now, of course, one of the most prominent platforms for mHealth is a smartphone, partly because they're ubiquitous and partly because they're very powerful computers in your pocket, but also because they have a tremendous capability for sensing their environment. And those sensors can be used in clever ways to monitor or measure a person's behavior or activities or, in some cases, physiology, and feed that information then into algorithms inside the phone or up into the cloud for all the purposes I mentioned before. But beyond smartphones, there are lots of other devices emerging. Many of these are wearable, including a relatively new category of smartwatches, but also, of course, other kinds of wearable sensors, as well as sort of intermittent use devices like this inhaler or a pill box or that blood pressure cuff. All of these are emerging rapidly. I see new announcements every week of either sort of clinical grade or consumer grade, medically or health-related sensing devices. Some of them are personal and wearable and portable, and some of them are maybe more shared devices, which raise interesting questions around identity and privacy, like a scale that might be used by members of a household, or a blood pressure monitor that might be used by 2 elderly patients at home, etc. Or some measure the environment and not just the person, because the environment is also often important in many health conditions. So from the perspective of someone interested in security and privacy, what's different about all this, about mHealth or even health IT in general? And for me, the security issues are prominent because the potential impact of a security failure in mHealth could be immediate and significant. Some of these devices sense information about you, but some actually actuate on you. The most prominent example might be a pacemaker, an infusion pump, insulin pump, or something like that that actually affects your body. And so a security-related failure could lead to direct harm to the individual. But even if in the case of devices or apps that just collect data, obviously that information is collected for a reason. It might be used to make decisions by the patient or the clinical team, and using incorrect data could lead to bad decisions that could harm the patient. Maybe even more obvious, of course, are all the privacy-related challenges. The data from mHealth apps and devices is inherently personal, is literally about you, and so exposing that information could be a major concern for many people. And compared to clinical data, the volume of data is vastly greater, especially from these continuously collected data streams that many apps or devices might collect. I go to the clinic once a year to get my height, weight, blood pressure, and all the usual metrics, but if I'm wearing a device, it might be collecting information about me once a second for a year or more. And so and of course the diversity of data might be much greater, not just the usual clinical metrics, but all the information about my physical, social, behavioral activities in my daily life might be collected. And then finally, of course, the uses are different or broader. In addition to the classic clinical diagnosis and treatment, there's also a range of uses of this data that the patient or person might want outside of the doctor-patient relationship and outside of the regulations, frankly, that tend to cover those uses. And so this is what makes it different from a security and privacy perspective, and so actually exciting to someone like me. Unfortunately, a lot of the technology that has been developed has not had a great attention to security and privacy. There are many examples, and just to sort of give you one kind of newspaper level example, there have been some studies by various agencies or groups that have found that many of the mobile health apps out there are not paying enough attention to privacy. In this particular study, they found that in most of these cases, it was even hard to find the privacy policy, and even those that did have a privacy policy weren't really as transparent as they should be. Some of our researchers in our research program studied Android apps. They downloaded and picked apart 160 mHealth apps from the Android store and found that 2/3 of them were sending their data across the internet with no encryption whatsoever, making them vulnerable then to some eavesdropper who could then pick up the personal health-related information. And almost over 80% of them use third-party storage cloud services, which aren't inherently bad by any means, but that are not necessarily configured in a way that would be secure enough for health-related information. So given all that motivation, those trends, the technology, some of the evidence that the current marketplace is not paying enough attention, we set out to create this research program, which started now almost 2.5 years ago, called Trustworthy Health and Wellness. And it's mostly computer scientists, but a very interdisciplinary team from 5 universities, Dartmouth, Hopkins, Michigan, Illinois, and Vanderbilt. Computer scientists, health economists, health IT expert, in fact, the chief information security officer at Hopkins Medical, a behavioral health expert, I'm sure many of you know Lisa Marsh, and a population health policy expert, Jonathan Weiner from Hopkins. So it's a really high-powered and exciting team, and of course many students as well as these faculty. So in this Trustworthy Health and Wellness program, we're focused on mobile and cloud technology being used for health and wellness with a focus on security and privacy. It's big space, and in fact this figure kind of emphasizes the diversity of that space. At the top of the figure is the person patient or person about whom we're monitoring their health, and yet there's a huge range of subjects involved. These aren't just clinical patients that we have in mind, but they might be an athlete who's trying to improve her performance, or a person who is trying to quit smoking or lose weight or something like that. And they're being measured by sensors, and they may be actually affected by actuators, which all may be controlled by a mobile device, such as a smartphone or a wearable device. And that produces some data, which then flows through the network, perhaps through a home gateway box of some kind, to the cloud, either to an electronic health record or some other kind of cloud service that then stores the data, analyzes the data, makes it available, and where it may be, in fact, accessed by another mobile device in the hands of a clinical staff person or family members or other kinds of caregivers, athletic trainers, for example. And so there's a huge range of types of devices, a range of patients or people being monitored, a range of people using the data, and no one organization manages or owns or operates all of these pieces. And so that means that there are many security domains and information boundaries to think about with respect to privacy and security. So we are a large group, as you saw, the set of professors earlier, and we've been underway for 2.5 years out of 5 years for our grant, our funded grant. And we have a lot of projects underway. I'm not going to cover all these projects. Some of them are highlighted at our website, which you can see named in the lower left corner, thaw.org. And we have a blog there, and if you subscribe, you can get occasional updates about our work. But today I'm going to focus on just a couple of projects to give you a flavor of some of the things that we're doing. And I'll start with one from Hopkins called Beacon Plus. And this is based on this new technology called Bluetooth beacons or Bluetooth low-energy beacons, which are small, low-cost transmitting devices that just announce their presence. So they're interested, this group is interested in using these technologies for several applications. For example, location tracking in a hospital, because these beacons can be placed at various spots around the hospital. Any Bluetooth-enabled device, like a smartphone, can hear the transmission from the beacon. And because the beacons are literally affixed to the wall or the infrastructure in some way, receiving the beacon's message allows them to recognize where they are in the hospital with a very high degree of accuracy. And you can use that location information for several applications. One would be inventory, knowing where are my resources. If I have a mobile x-ray machine, or for that matter, a mobile clinician, I might be able to know where they are at any given time and optimize my resources. Another would be access control. So you might want to limit some person's access to sensitive data based on where they are when they make the access, or where the patient is when you're trying to access that patient's record. And then finally, another one would be simple navigation, much like you might use your GPS in a car to navigate across a city from one place to another. Giving visitors in particular the ability to navigate within a complex hospital is a useful application. So the technology is called beacons, or iBeacons. There are many brands out there right now. This is a booming new industry. This particular one is called Estimote. It's about the size of 2 quarters side by side. And they're inexpensive. We just bought 150 at Dartmouth for our research use, and they're about $10 a piece in quantity. And the idea is to stick them on the wall or stick them in fixed locations around a facility and and just let them beacon, meaning kind of like a lighthouse. They're just periodically transmitting. In this case, they transmit their identity number. And as a receiver, if you have a table that says this beacon is in the emergency room, then you know where you are. The problem is that these beacons have, guess what, no security. They broadcast a message that is in the clear, which is fine, but which anyone else could broadcast, or for that matter, you could walk in and be broadcasting fake beacons, and the recipients wouldn't have any way to know which ones are authentic, meaning provided by the hospital, let's say, and which ones were faked, provided by a malcontent of some kind. And so the Hopkins group built their own beacons using some off-the-shelf hardware and have programmed them to include cryptographic authentication codes as well, so that anyone receiving the beacon message can verify that this is in fact an authentic beacon. And so the idea is that recipients, in this example, iPhones or iPads or tablets, receiving these beacons can receive the beacon, verify its authenticity, and talk to some server, for example, to update their location in a location tracking database or get access to patient records and have the server know that the beacon is authentic and therefore know that the iPhone or whatever accessing the records is in fact in that location. So this is an interesting computer science-y kinds of research problem. How do you do this in a low-power device in a very efficient way with high-quality cryptography and strong security? One of the things that we would be interested in learning more about from talking to people in the healthcare business is whether these kinds of applications would in fact be useful, whether location-based access control, meaning where access is either allowed or denied based on the location of the clinical person accessing the record or based on the current location of the patient in the hospital, would be of interest. Another project, actually one done by my graduate student, Srirang Mare, here at Dartmouth, is called BRACE, which is a rather tortured acronym. It stands for Bilateral Recurring Authentication Conducted Effortlessly. We had a much nicer name, Zebra, Zero Effort Bilateral Recurring Authentication, until the Zebra company sent us a letter reminding us that they have a trademark on that name. And so we came up with the name BRACE. And it's bilateral because it uses two sources of input. And the goal here is to ensure that the person seated at a terminal is in fact the person who is logged in to the terminal. And so we're using two pieces of information: the terminal's keyboard and mouse inputs, the computer, desktop, computer on wheels, whatever you want to call that device that clinicians use to access medical records or enter prescriptions in a hospital setting. And then the other source is a bracelet, much like a smartwatch or, for that matter, a Fitbit type device would work just fine. And so the idea here is was motivated by authentication to clinical information systems in hospitals. And in particular, the IT staff at our hospital, Dartmouth Hitchcock, were concerned about de-authentication. So people can log in with their username and password, and they can update records and make prescriptions and so forth, but then they tend to walk away. And that means that the computer then is left unattended and logged in, and therefore anyone else could walk up and use their credentials to look at patients or take actions, and that's risky. So the problem then is, how can we make it easy to for clinical staff to log in and log out and yet not leave the systems open to that kind of risk? So of course the classic method is a timeout. You log the person out automatically after a few 10 minutes, 20 minutes of inactivity, but that doesn't work if somebody else comes up and is active within that time period. And so Dartmouth Hitchcock tried a proximity sensor. They put that on top of the terminal, and then as long as there was a person in front of the terminal, they would not log them out. But people found very quickly that they could just put a styrofoam cup over the proximity sensor. It would always detect proximity because the cup was there and never log them out, which of course is convenient for the clinical staff, but terribly insecure. So Another solution that's common is proximity-based. So you carry, as an authorized person, some kind of a token with you. It might be in your pocket or dangling on a necklace that has a radio communication with the desktop. And as long as you remain close by, you stay logged in. But if you walk out of range, the computer logs you out. And that's fine, except there are a lot of places, a lot of clinical settings with multiple terminals and many people, and you might still be nearby in radio range and yet not be the person who's actually using the keyboard. So what we really wanted to know is who is actually using the device right now? Who is making those keystrokes? The computer knows that keys are being struck, the mouse is moving, but who is it? And so our solution is Brace. The person wears a wristband, much like a Fitbit, that has the ability to detect the wrist's movement. And of course, the computer can detect keystrokes and mouse movements. If the wristband sends its movement information to the computer can try to correlate those two. And if they remain correlated, then the person who is wearing the wristband must in fact be the person sitting at the terminal. And so if that correlation fails, then you kick the person off, log them out, lock the screen, whatever. And it's pretty easy to see if you look at a graph of wrist movement, in this case acceleration of the wrist, while they're scrolling or while they're moving the mouse, moving their hand from the mouse to the keyboard, there's a big spike in acceleration. And then when they're typing, there's a different kind of behavior. The hand is moving about the keyboard. And so at least visually you can get a sense that, yeah, the wrist moves differently in these different activities. And so we want to try to recognize that activity given wrist movement and then correlate that with inputs. So there's an actual sequence of interactions, keystrokes or mouse movements, and then there's a wrist movements that are acceleration signals. We use machine learning to classify that into actions like typing, scrolling, or switching between mouse and keyboard. And then in the interval of time when, say, keystrokes are happening, you compare the actions with the predicted ones from the wrist, and if they correlate, it's the right person, and if they don't correlate, it's the wrong person. Now, some people who are familiar with this problem and some of the solutions think we might be using biometrics. There are other solutions out there that actually learn how a person types and recognizes, for example, me, David Kotz, because I type in a particular way and I type differently than other people do. That's a behavioral biometric. It's not a physical biometric like my fingerprint. It's just a sense of how I behave, in this case, typing. We don't use anything like that. In fact, our machine learning is trained generically for all users, so any bracelet will do for any employee. And of course, then the question is, well, who's wearing the bracelet, right? And that's another problem. And in fact, I had another student who developed a bracelet that could recognize who is wearing it. And it used a physical property called bioimpedance to recognize the wrist that was inside the bracelet. Every time you put the bracelet on, it would run a little micro electrical current through your wrist and recognize your wrist as distinct from mine. And so that would be one way you could do it. A bracelet could have that capability and then vouch for you when you log into or use a clinical terminal. So we did some user studies to verify that Brace works pretty well. And in fact, we found that we can identify an adversary, meaning someone other than the logged-in user has stepped in very quickly, in fact. Depending on how we tweak the parameters, within 10 seconds, 10 or 11 seconds, we've identified everyone who tried to step into the terminal. Or if you make it a little more usable, a little less sensitive, certainly within a minute. That's a lot faster than a 10 or 20 or 30-minute timeout. And in fact, this works even when the adversary is using the computer, which is what you're concerned about. So it looks very promising. Now that's just one way to use Brace, a continuous authentication for the purpose of de-authentication. And we would like to extend this to initial authentication, meaning I walk up and now I don't have to put in username or password. I just tap the key, pick a key, any key, tap a key a few times. My wrist is moving and in fact can feel the tapping sensation. Of course, the computer can see that the key is being tapped. Or you wiggle the mouse and your wrist is wiggling too, right? You correlate those two things very precisely and the user gets logged in with no username or password. Or, of course, desktops is what we had been using on before. A lot of people use smartphones and tablets. So now we're extending this to smartphones. You pick up your smartphone, and your phone can tell that it's being picked up, and your wrist is making a pickup motion, and correlating those two motions is a sign that it's you and you're picking up your phone. If somebody else picks up your phone, or if somebody starts using your phone after you've unlocked it, we'll recognize it quickly, lock the phone, and prevent them from using it. Or let them use it, but prevent them from using the patient record application, for example. A third project is related to small health networks. This is a student of mine here at Dartmouth. And his interest is in helping the people who manage small clinics or homes where increasingly there are medical devices that are internet connected and somehow need to get configured so that they can connect to the internet and deliver the data to, for example, a remote health record. And the people who have to use this technology and set it up are not technical people generally, and don't have, full-time sysadmins to tend their devices. So he focused on the very first step. How do you get these devices on Wi-Fi? Take a brand new device home and get it on your Wi-Fi network. And I'll bet if I polled you all, you would all have a story of how frustrating that can be sometimes. And it's hard enough for a laptop, but imagine it for a small device that has no keyboard or screen, right? It's an Internet of Things. It's a small medical device that has a couple of buttons and a numerical readout. It's hard. So his solution was, his goal was to make that really easy. His example was a blood pressure device. As I said, the focus so far has been on how do you get it onto the Wi-Fi network. The broader question is then, okay, now when it's on the internet, how does it know where to send the data, which electronic health record, which patient, and so forth. We're working on that now. So his solution is to have modify your access point, your Wi-Fi access point, just a little bit. It has a USB connector in the back, most of them do, and we would build a special device called the wand that just plugs into that USB device, and it sits there most of the time, staying charged, and the Wi-Fi access point shares the information needed to connect to the access point with the wand through the USB. So the wand knows, this is how I get on this Wi-Fi access point. When I come home with a new device, medical device or other, that I want to put on this network, I pull out the wand, I walk over to the new device, I press a button, and it transmits the secrets to the medical device. Those secrets are an SSID and a password, the name, in other words, the name of the network and the password to get on it. So you just carry the tool, this wand, over to the device, and you inject, meaning transmit through radio, this secret, and then the medical device can get on. And it's remarkably simple, and we can do it in a half a second. The secrets are transmitted in a half a second, and the user, there's no user interface is needed other than maybe a button to say, start receiving this data. So it's fast, half a second. It's really easy. We tested it with a lot of people, and not surprisingly, pointing a stick at a device is not hard. And it's very secure because we've shown that you have to be within 12 centimeters of the device in order to hear the secrets, here in a radio sense. And so any adversary who's listening in and eavesdropping has to be awfully close enough for you to notice. And it's not just useful for Wi-Fi secrets. You can actually transmit any small secret to the device. So we have other ideas about how it can be used. And I think my fourth and maybe final project I'm going to talk about today is related to disease tracking, epidemic tracking. We were talking to the Student Health Services recently, and after the Ebola epidemic, and their concern about how they could track contacts among an infected person, a student, for example, and all the other folks on campus, and build that contact graph that is so essential to containing an epidemic. And of course, Ebola hopefully won't be an issue for us, but flu and measles and others are more common here, and some of them, like measles, are very serious. And in fact, challenging because it turns out, I didn't know this, the virus can survive in the air for 2 hours after the infected person has left. And so this led us to think, well, how can we use technology to help? You know, if the Student Health Services said, I need to know everyone this student has been in contact with, if we just ask the student, they can name their roommate and a few classmates and a professor or two, but all the other people in the dining hall, not so easy. So of course, all the students have smartphones, and when the smartphones are in the same place, or close enough anyway, they could, in principle, keep a record of that. My smartphone is close to your smartphone. And then later on, if you're determined to be infected, maybe somehow I could be notified that I may have been exposed to your virus. Physical co-location is relatively easy. Close encounters, meaning almost the same place at almost the same time, but not the same time, is harder because we're never actually in the same place at the same time. You left and then I arrived 5-10 minutes later. So smartphones alone can't solve this problem. And so our solution is actually back to those Bluetooth beacons. And in fact, just this week we have deployed Bluetooth beacons in our dining facilities, our library, our gym, and we're going to put it in some dorms so that we can test this idea. Could the smartphones collect data from beacons about where they were and when, and then later, when necessary, if the outbreak is discovered, we could compare everyone's location history with the history of the infected person to find out with whom they crossed paths in this close encounter sense, and then notify them, warn them to be on the lookout for symptoms or take the following precautions or what have you. So that project is just beginning, and hopefully we'll have some results in a while. The interesting thing there, of course, is to do it in a way that preserves privacy so that even the health authorities don't know where every student has gone. And no one except the student themselves might be able to look at their own location history. The next project is called Amulet, which is actually not part of THAW, but is focused on wearables. And our concern is that smartphones may not be the best platform for mobile health because they might be stolen. As we all know, they can break. They might be left behind. And so our goal is to use wearable wristband technology, smartwatch-like technology for mobile health. And the idea here is to have a platform that is dedicated to health applications with you all the time. It could authenticate you through, for example, that bioimpedance method I talked about earlier. It can be secured in a very strong way, much stronger than a mobile phone, which might be infected with all kinds of malware through games and what have you. And it has an interface to the user that's very private because it's on my wrist. I'm the only one who might feel it vibrate or see the notifications, and hopefully could communicate with other mobile health devices. So we've built this from scratch. We built what we call an Amulet, which is now, after we've built it, looks a lot like today's smartwatches, except not nearly as glitzy. And it is a research platform now for us to experiment with the use of wearable wristbands for health-related applications, collecting data from wearable sensors, pushing them through a smartphone perhaps and up into the cloud, and then using that for clinical applications or research. And this is what our not quite most recent, I need newer pictures, prototype looks like, and technical specifications I won't bore you with. We actually have a brand new board. One of the grad students got bored over Christmas and completely re-engineered the electronics, and so pretty impressive student. And so this particular view of it is outdated. But we're going to be piloting this with the Center for Technology and Behavioral Health in March on a very, very early pilot just to get a sense of how well the technology works. Our main goal right now is focused on stress. We're interested in being able to use initially for research studies, measuring the wearer's stress level, and then later using that for interventions related to stress, for example, in reducing, in helping people quit smoking or addressing addictive behavior or, and so forth. And then this final section of the talk is not one I'm really going to talk much about. It's really more a set of slides that might be useful to you offline. As you can imagine, there's a lot of regulation around healthcare, of course, and health technology, and a lot of that is catching up to the new mHealth technology. And so I gathered a bunch of resources that are interesting. I'm not a lawyer. I'm certainly not an expert on policy or the legal issues, but it took a while for me to gather this information, and I thought some of these slides or the reports behind these slides might be of interest to those of you who really want to engage with some of the legal issues or the regulatory issues around medical devices, cybersecurity for medical devices, the software in medical devices. The FDA is sort of slowly catching up to this stuff, and then more recently human factors in the development of that software and ensuring its reliability and security. Some other agencies or groups doing studies of patient privacy and data security. More recently, the FDA's guidance on cybersecurity in medical devices. This is of increasing interest and notice that devices, medical devices now are basically small computers, although they don't look like them, and many of them are networked, and many of them are vulnerable to the same kind of internet-based attacks that computers are. A report from a federal advisory committee on the broader health data infrastructure that the nation should have, in their view. ONC stepping in, of course, with privacy and security of health information. These go on. There's a lot of interesting federal reports here. And this is out of date because, in fact, today the FDA announced another guidance on mobile medical applications and security and interoperability in medical devices. So this particular release a couple of years ago is probably of most interest to many of you. I would think mobile medical applications are defined precisely by the FDA, and they talk about which ones they will apply regulatory oversight to and which ones they won't. So, like I said, I'm not going to talk about all these. If you're interested in those, I've collected all those reports in one Dropbox folder, which you can reach through this tiny URL link, mHealth Policy. And I gather that this talk will be made available online, so you can look this up later. So to summarize, the FAW program and our research more broadly has been motivated by the advent of health and wellness technology and its potential to increase quality, reduce cost, and improve access. But our concern as professional computer scientists about the risks related to security and privacy, and are just a sampling of some of the research we're doing in that area. So here's a bit more about THAW, and I hope you'll have a chance to visit our website and maybe subscribe to our blog to get updates on what we're doing. There's a lot of people involved. Some of the things that projects I mentioned involve quite a few people, and I certainly want to acknowledge their input, as well as our funding sources, primarily from the NSF for the THAW program, and NSF for the Amulet program, and some of the predecessor work from ONC under the SHARP program. And I think with that, I'll stop and take questions. So as a reminder, I think you have to press #6 to unmute yourself.
Thank you, David. That was a great talk. Remember, everyone, please use #6 to unmute. And I have one question about this wearable. You have the Amulet project plus the Brace project. We, as consumers, already wearing sensors and Fitbits and things like that. This will be in addition to, or will you be able to put all this technology so that we only need to wear one thing?
That's a great question. Yeah, sure. I would expect that one could do all three of those things in one device. In fact, the Brace project has as its technical requirements the same technology that's in a Fitbit Flex. It's very simple: an accelerometer, a little computer, and Bluetooth. And so in principle, although obviously Fitbit may not want to do this, one could build a device that provided both the Fitbit-like capability and the Brace capability. Amulet is more sophisticated because it's designed to run multiple apps. A given person might install 2 or 3 or 4 health-related applications, and our interest has been in how one does that efficiently and with high security. But one of those apps could be a Fitbit app, or a fitness app that has the same, goals and properties as Fitbit.
Hello?
Yes? I heard hello.
Go ahead, Betty. She's like me. She probably, I sometimes push the off button rather than the mute button, and there it goes. So she'll be back.
Hello, am I muted or unmuted?
You're back.
Hello?
Yes. You may be pressing it many times and coming in and out.
Okay, now I am okay.
Please ask.
This is Betty Tai speaking. First, I'd like to thank you, David, for such a fascinating topic, especially in a snowed-in day, that the technology was able to link us all together, and hearing this wonderful and informative seminar, and we'd like to thank you so much. My question to you is that this certainly is a small portion of your research portfolio. And when you are working on all these projects, do you have a specific type of disease in your mind in developing this, or it was just very general, anything that can be applied to mHealth shapes your research goals?
Oh, that's a great question. No, we do not have a specific disease or condition or application in mind. Some of the projects have specific diseases or applications in mind, but as an overall project or portfolio, no, we do not. For example, there are projects in THAW that are focused on genomic databases and the privacy issues involved in big data analysis of genomic data. Very different. There are other ones that have specifically focused on infusion pumps and the cybersecurity risks and solutions for infusion pumps. And there are others that are on mHealth. Most of the ones I talked about were more about either clinical or patient use of mobile devices, wearable devices. So it really depends. And frankly, we are very interested in hearing from you in this group about the potential applications of mobile technology in behavioral health, and especially I would imagine, the privacy issues that come up in the use of this technology. And partly because we're technologists, and so we imagine what the issues might be, but you're the health experts or the health research experts and could give us really good insight into what would be helpful and what the real risks might be. So I'd love to hear from any of you on that issue now or offline.
So it was pretty intriguing for me to learn that you can wear a sensor, and detect the different typing mode that each person expressed very differently. So I was wondering, if somebody is injecting a drug, will that act be detected if wearing this sensor?
Well, very interesting. First of all, we didn't do that work, although others have several times, the behavioral biometric for typing. Keystroke biometrics is called. And in fact, some groups have found that wearing an Apple Watch, they can tell what you're typing, what letters you're typing, just by monitoring the movements of your wrist. Very clever. But so my guess is it would be difficult to detect whether someone wearing a wristband like that was injecting a drug to themselves or to someone else. But maybe if there are very recognizable, repeatable kinds of movements, those might be it might be possible to recognize those. For example, there is a group at UMass that, using similar technology, wristband technology, was able to detect and distinguish eating, drinking, and smoking from the wrist movement. So if your wrist is moving, if your hand is moving back and forth up to your mouth and back, right? Those are all things that happen when you eat, drink, or smoke. They could tell that you were doing that and distinguish among them. Not perfectly, but you know.
Yeah. So can they detect the difference between smoking a cigarette versus smoking a marijuana? cigarette.
Not with that technology, but a group here at Dartmouth, of which I'm a part, has developed a wearable sensor that's nicotine specific, so it senses the air, and it senses smoke in the air, and it looks specifically for nicotine, and I think he's made a version of the sensor that's specific to whatever the byproducts of marijuana are. So it's he made another one for the wine industry that senses chemicals that come from winemaking. So there's definitely potential for that.
That is really interesting to know. So the other thing, of course, we recognize that the addiction is a brain disease, and it goes through its course, of these the disease, and people developing craving, actively use drug, and then afterwards they may have euphoria, or they may experience crash, and then they will restart this whole thing, and of course if they don't use well, have a withdrawal, and that would be interesting for us to know if we can detect that from the patient rather than just get their self-report, because sometimes they can't remember, or they did not give you the facts and all that, and so detecting the behavior of using drug and desire to use drug, and also detecting the frequency of their use drug. If those can be detected with advanced technology, could help the research so tremendously.
Yeah, there is a group at the University of Memphis led by Santosh Kumar. Actually, it's an extended group across many places that has done some of that work with multiple devices worn by a subject, and they were able to detect certain kinds of drug use. We are trying to use the stress measurement in the Amulet to detect craving, or at least our hope is that by measuring stress, we will be able to distinguish a craving incident and then eventually provide intervention to help someone who is trying to quit recognize their moment of craving and redirect them to some other activity, whether that be, for smoking or drug use. But that's a ways down the road. First, we have to prove that we can detect stress well, which is not easy.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll yield my time to others. You have to push *6 to unmute yourself. I think I'm going to mute myself now.
Hello.
David, this is Gavin Bard. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to thank you for your presentation. Thank you also for some of the time you're spending with our 42 CFR Part 2 group within the CPN. And so I want to ask a question along those lines. Certainly we can't have a different device for every disease. There's going to be one device or an Internet of Things. So let's go to your Amulet, for example. Let's say the Amulet has multiple functions. It's picking up heart rate. Does it have the capability, or as a technologist, how would you think through the capacity that when the heart rate gets to be too much, or if there's an arrhythmia, it's able to appropriately inform and upload into the EHR for the cardiologist. But when it's detecting stress, and that is a potential trigger for a relapse to a substance use disorder, it can selectively and alternatively communicate through the EHR to only the specified under 42 CFR Part 2 provider who's managing that, so as to segregate and protect the data. Is that something that can be worked into these devices?
Yeah, sure, I would think so. And you make a good point that we can't necessarily have a plethora of devices for any given user, which is one reason that motivated our Amulet approach, is that we anticipated that people would want one multi-use device, but that the smartphone wouldn't necessarily be the best such device. And so the Amulet is designed to run multiple applications And in a patient where both arrhythmia and drug use might be an issue, you would have an arrhythmia app and a drug use app, and each would be monitoring similar signals and making their own determination and then reporting independently to the relevant recipients. And so we haven't thought specifically about 42 CFR in Amulet work, but definitely we're interested in the questions around access control and privacy management there. Isolating apps from each other. So if you did have a Fitbit app as well, it shouldn't be able to know that you have a drug abuse app on there or what that other app is doing. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it's definitely feasible to do what you're suggesting.
No, that's very helpful. I'm assuming there's a way where the wearer is able to control moment, not second to second, but to update who the sharing permissions go with, to rescind and then activate
Right.
sharing to specific individuals.
Right. We haven't explored that particular aspect of it from a research perspective. I know that it's a major, it would be a key part of any complete solution, and it's part of our overall Amulet vision that the patient or the wearer would select what applications they want. Maybe some of them are recommended or even prescribed, as it were, by their physician or caretaker, and that combination of applications would be custom assembled for that person and installed on his or her Amulet. And the destination of any data coming out of those applications would then go back to the relevant provider. If one provider recommends the Fitbit app for your training and another the cardiology app for your heart, they would get the relevant data. But there would be some web-based, probably web-based, maybe smartphone-based interface for the user to review all that and make their own choices.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Others?
Hi, this is Brian Ekman from MUSC in Charleston, and just thanks again for the talk. I'm just kind of getting into this area of research, and my KO ward is developing smartphone apps for smoking cessation. And then we're looking to integrate remote monitoring via EMA type things in our addictions clinic here. So it's nice to have you raise all these areas to look forward to look into. And I wanted to just ask if you could maybe elaborate on the third-party storage and hosting services like Amazon Web Services and potential alternatives or things to think through when at that decision point.
Well, I mentioned that just in passing when I was referring to a study that some of my colleagues did about Android apps, and they made it sound a little bad. I made it sound a little bit bad. Oh my gosh, these apps are using third-party hosting services. They're not, and I want to emphasize, they're not inherently bad. It's just that one needs to take care in using them and choosing ones that are, for example, HIPAA compliant, if that's relevant for your use, or if regardless, making sure that they're configured in a way that is secure. But if you're looking for something specific, like don't use Amazon, use IBM Cloud, I really have no opinion. I don't know enough details about each one to be able to recommend any specific.
Yeah, I mentioned Amazon because that's what was in the slide, so I didn't know if there was some.
It's a bit, yeah. Amazon's a sort of the generic example, but there are, of course, several such providers, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is Carmen again. It's past 3 p.m., so being aware of the time, I want to thank David and his group, as well as all of you that participated in the webinar. And please check our CTN dissemination library for the archive recording of the session, as well as a link to the slides, so we all can have the additional information that David was alluding to. So again, thank you everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day. for all of us that are still snow in, well, let's go back to shoveling and dig us out. And see you all.
Thank you.